So I'll just start with a little bit of context for this story, because we often pull this little piece out of context and it really doesn't make a lot of sense. So Ahaz, king of Israel and Judah, and he is making an alliance with the Egyptians to keep the Assyrians out, right? So kind of west, east, north, south, Israel and Judah, Assyria, Babylon, Egypt, right? So his hope is that the Egyptians will basically make him a vassal state and put him at the edge of their boundaries so the Assyrians won't come in. And that didn't work. But here's Isaiah coming to Ahaz and telling him, you got to get right with God. And God himself says, what do you want, Ahaz? And Ahaz is like, I'm good. Now it pretends to be this piety and this false humility, but really Ahaz has his own solutions. Like, we're just going to partner with the Egyptians and it's going to be fine. Even though Isaiah is there telling him, like, dude, this isn't going to work. This is not the right way to go. Ahaz is like, I got this. I don't need God on this one. We're going to be able to endure this next thing that happens. So the part I find most fascinating about this section, has anyone ever heard somebody talk about curds and the honey? Yeah? I love it. So I think that this is probably the most fascinating part of this actual scripture, not the child shall be born and called Emmanuel. It's the curds and honey. Where does honey come from? Bees. Can you make honey? No. Where do curds come from? And it's the separated part out of the milk, right? It takes a minute to do. It doesn't just happen. So let's put this in the context of Isaiah has just got done telling Ahaz, this isn't going to work. And all of this land is going to be destroyed. Assyria is going to come in here and mess this all up. This is going to be wilderness. And wilderness does not mean trees and plentifulness. It means desert, deserted, right? So there's like a weird, doesn't make sense, like, wait a minute. You're telling me that a completely destroyed and desolate land is going to produce milk and honey? Now, of course, you've got the resonance in the back of your head, milk and honey, the land flowing with milk and honey, the land of Canaan that was promised to the Jewish people as they were exiting Egypt. Again, there's another of these connections coming back around. And so there's this question of, could you possibly believe it? Could you possibly believe that something good could come out of this desolation? And I think there's that same question in our own lives. Could something good, could we really believe that something good could come out of this desolation if only we trusted in God? Or we're going to be like, nah, dude, I got this. I'm going to go figure it out on my own. I'm going to go figure out how to endure on my own. I'm a minister and I'm pretty upfront about it with people that I meet out there, and it turns out half of the people I meet, a quarter of them are like, well, that's interesting, and then a quarter of them, I swear to God, want to talk to me about the apocalypse. Right? I swear to God, a quarter of people want to talk to me about the end of the world. And, you know, we could get into the symbolism and Revelation, and we could dissect all of that and talk about, you know, why Jesus in Mark's gospel says the things the way he does and do it. They don't care about that. That's not the point. They're bringing it up because their life is actually a hot mess. And they want to know, in biblical language, how long, Lord, how long? When they're really talking to me about the apocalypse, they're really talking about, is this crap going to go on forever? Is this just going to keep getting worse? At some point, is there going to be some kind of inbreak? At some point, is there going to be some kind of resolution? Because where they're at sure looks like evil is winning. where they're at, it sure looks like desolation forever. How can you possibly talk of curds and honey? This is a mess. And so I think they want to know, do I actually believe in curds and honey or not? On some level. Now, here's the other interesting thing about curds and honey. Now, I know we're all very educated in the modern world. We have lots of information. We know not to feed kids honey. Does anybody remember why we're not supposed to feed kids honey? Right, so we're worried about an anaphylactic response, right? Like stimulating your immune system. But did you know that honey is traditionally the first food that you give children in the Near East for centuries? And then as they get older, they graduate to curds, which is one of the first solid foods they would eat. And so when they say that this child will eat curds and honey by the time they know the difference between good and evil, it's roughly saying about 3 years, right? 3 or 4 years, because there's a pregnancy and then there's a birth, and about 2 or 3 is about the age that scholars think they're talking about in terms of know the difference between good and evil, right? When they know they're doing wrong, they don't necessarily care that they're doing wrong, but they know that they're doing wrong, right? Yeah, we've been there for a while now. But you know, the other way to think about this promise of curds and honey is like, okay, 2 to 3 years, 3 to 4 years. How many times in your life has 2 to 3 years or 3 to 4 years gone by like that? And how many times has 2 to 3 years been forever? From where you're at right now, is 2 to 3 years forever or nothing? Yeah. It has everything to do with where you're at right now. If you're suffering right now, and you think that 2 to 3 years is going to be a continuation, if you're facing macular degeneration, 2 to 3 years, what the hell is the world going to be like then for me, right? If you're facing a diagnosis, 2 to 3 years is irrelevant. I hang out with people who are like 6 months. I'm not willing to think past 6 months. Right? Not, I'm going to choose to live in today because I want to be. No, they're like, I'm going to be dead. So what's that? So there's something about this curds and honey, which is a promise of going through. And sometimes that amount of time is nothing. When we look backwards often, we say, God, what happened in 1997? Reference. But it's gonna be hard sometimes to get through this period of time. Sometimes it's gonna be quick. But one of the things I'm noticing that a lot of people out there don't think that they need God to get through some of this stuff. I had a lot of conversations with people who are like, yeah, but like, what's that really getting? Where's that showing up for you? And I've been thinking about this a lot. I was asked recently, what's Christmas all about to you? And I really talked about whether we really believe that this baby is going to do anything. See, one of the things about Isaiah is there's some possibility of hopefulness in this idea of the warrior coming to save, right? The destruction of our enemies. And I think so often it's overcoming, it's enduring, it's getting through the next hard thing, right? That's what motivates us. It's like, God, well, if this would be over, if I'd be freed from this suffering, if this problem would be fixed, if this political issue would be resolved, then, right, then I'll have peace, then I'll have hope, then I'll have joy, then I'll... But what I find the most compelling about Christmas is this idea of in the midst, this idea of the child being born in the midst. and that the world doesn't change, but somehow my ability to face the world changes. You know, I need God because I need to believe, and I don't often, I need to believe that it's worth it to be ethical and unethical. How many of you struggle with choosing to be ethical in an unethical world? A couple of you, okay. Or choosing an attitude of abundance in a world that teaches nothing but scarcity. Believing that you have enough, believing that you are enough, believing that there is enough, and working to orient relationships in society out of that attitude. I mean, I don't know how I could remain if I didn't have some sense of something greater. That curds and honey is this promise that life will go on in the midst. Because things are going to get bad and then they're going to get worse in Isaiah. He goes on to say, yeah. And even when Assyria is defeated, guess who comes next? Babylon. And guess what happens then? Then y'all get kicked out of your homes. They take over this land and they're going to send you all thousands of miles away into exile. And you'll be there for years. It's going to go from bad to worse. And yet, somehow, this ordinary blessing of curds and honey is still going to be in the world for you. Somehow, the ability to feed your kids is going to be in the world for you. I think about this activist I was talking to. He found out I was a minister and he got his self-righteous, I'm going to tear you apart face on. And y'all know me, that didn't work out very well for him, which was fun. I had a good time. He was worried he had offended me. I thought that was funny. But he said, you know, I'm not going to have kids because this world's a mess. Climate change. I'm not going to have kids. That's a compassionate thing to do, he says. And then he goes on to tell me about how I must be wrong because religion doesn't actually care about people. We need to care about people more. And I was like, can we put those two statements you just made next to each other for a minute? And this is like an hour conversation, so I really had to move back. But I realized that there is difference. And it had everything to do with taking responsibility for casting a vision of the future. He didn't want to take responsibility for that. He said, this is all broken. This is a mess. I don't want to subject anyone to it. We should just care for people where they are right now, but like, we just need to endure this till it all falls apart and the end of civilization. I mean, this is really like where he's headed. And I don't think he's unique. I don't think he's unique. I think this is a very common thought. But there's a certain responsibility that I think he wasn't willing to take about, well, what are we casting into the world? How are we leading in this world that's a mess? Are we articulating something worth following, worth trusting in, worth building for? Do we trust that there will be curds and honey, that there will be sustenance for the children, that the land will be able to produce this abundance that has nothing to do with us? You can't make bees make honey. You can't, well, I mean, you can force, there's a lot of weird, complicated stuff about cows and milk. But anyway, it's not a sermon for vegans. Right. Life will go on. And the question is, what are the signs that we're actually following? God says, I'll give you a sign, whatever you want. Ahaz says, I don't need a sign because I don't really care. What's the sign for you that allows you to trust, that allows you to envision, that allows you to invest, that allows you to take some responsibility, that allows you to desire out into the future for all of us? It can't be just in struggle. It can't be. We can't just be enduring. We have to have something more. Yeah.
The birds sing, dum, dum, dum. Why should I worry?
The birds sing, the sun comes up, why should I worry? there is certainly a place for encountering beauty and the bigness of God that is absolutely transformational. I want you to read this piece that I printed out for you by Bell Hooks called Love is the Practice of Freedom. There's copies on the prayer table, so you can grab one when you head over there after the service. And I want you to think about, how are we moving with God into this place of freedom? And how are we calling other people into this place of freedom through how we love?